We have some breaking news from the Montreal Canadiens organization and come to terms with young goaltender Cayden Primeau. Well, what does this mean for the goaltending position moving forward? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some pretty significant news in Montreal and lots of questions now being raised around the goaltending position. Young goalie Cayden Primeau, who was the only remaining unsigned player with the Montreal Canadiens, has now come to terms with the Habs on a new contract. The young goalie has been reported to sign a 3-year, one-way deal. So that's the important part here. It's the one-way contract. Now, what does that mean? That means that he's going to be paid the same salary regardless if he plays at the NHL level or at the American Hockey League level. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that he can't play in the American Hockey League level. Sometimes people get confused over one-way deals and, what the waivers requirements are and all that kind of stuff. But Cayden Primeau's salary breakdown is as follows. The coming season, he will be making a salary of $770,000. Year 2, he gets a bump to $800,000. And then in year 3, he gets a bump again to $1.1 million. Of course, Primeau right now is a late pick. The Montreal Canadiens been in the organization for some time. Had a real solid run at the college hockey level in the United States. Went on to play now a couple pro seasons, of mostly in the American Hockey League with some NHL experience. Hasn't had the greatest results, but at the same time, the teams in front of him haven't been phenomenal either, and sometimes you see goalies just make the jump to the NHL and they find that level sometimes easier. It's really hard to say, but we're still a goalie who I think Montreal and their fan base hope can be the goaltender of the future. So we will see. But what does this mean for the position? Because obviously lots of question marks now. We obviously have the future of Carey Price in question, which we'll talk about. Of course, you have Jake Allen and Samuel Montembeault also under contract. I've seen lots of fans on social media this morning when this news broke for Primeau's contract, wondering if we're going to see a goalie trade and who's going to go. What does it mean? I have 3 goaltenders on one-way deals. Well, Cayden Primeau is still waivers exempt. So when players are first into the NHL, there is different rules and requirements of when they will start to require waivers. They have to have a certain level of experience, games played, and Cayden Primeau for goaltenders has not reached that point yet. He either needs to have one more season or 56 games. So obviously 23-24, I'll show you here just to confirm that through capfriendly.com, is when waivers would start to be required for Cayden Primeau. For year 1 of this contract, probably, which explains why it's structured the way it is. He's obviously paid closer to a league minimum salary for the year, and he will get that money regardless. Like I said, even if he is demoted and plays in Laval, he will still be paid the same amount, and if he is, that full amount can be buried. You get just over $1 million, can be not counted against the cap. You get that cap relief when an NHL one-way contract has been placed at the minor league level. So that full amount can go to the minors if need be. They'll get the full amount available on the cap, and he doesn't need waivers this year. So really, do they need to make a move? They don't. But just to look at the goaltending future here, for example, Carey Price is by far the biggest, most established, successful goaltender in the organization, and there's a lot of question marks, as I've talked about on the channel before, on his future. Is he done? Completely, not just for the season, but is his career over? I mean, we know that Ken Hughes has said that it's very unlikely he's going to play this year. They've approached their cap situation and goalie position just exactly like that. That Price is not going to be there, not going to be available, and you do wonder if he can't play this year. I do think there's a high probability that he will not return and his career will be over. Now, he had an Instagram post himself this morning, which I'll show you, and if you take a look at the post here, it kind of gives you that retirement feeling, that his days are over as an active NHL player. I mean, we know his days are certainly not going to be an active player this year, but when you look at that post, you get the vibe that he's not going to be able to make it back. It's just unfortunate for him. He's had a great career, has a lot of money and term left on his contract, which will be complicated for Montreal to manage, but they can get through that. Now, of course, when it comes to the other goalies in the organization, you have Samuel Montembeault, who signed a 2-year contract with Montreal. He also had his deal expire at the end of last season. Got 2 years at $1.1 million. Now, of course, he's a couple years older than Primeau. He's 25. Again, doesn't have a ton of experience and his numbers aren't fantabulous, but, the numbers, he did have his moments last year with Montreal when he looked pretty decent. But of course, again, the team in front of him struggled. They were 32nd in the league. Hard to imagine what you can expect. Now, of course, you get Jake Allen, the veteran, 32 years old, former Stanley Cup winner in St. Louis. And obviously, there is rumors from Kevin Weeks and other reporters have since confirmed, which those started to leak out last night, that they're engaging with Jake and his agent around a multi-year contract extension. So when I seen news coming out of Montreal early this morning, I honestly thought first and foremost that it might be that. But of course, knowing Primeau needed a deal, that was also something that appeared to be being worked on and close to being completed as well. So obviously, if they're talking to Jake about a 2-year or multi-year contract extension, you would think that there's really no way he's going to be moved. I mean, he'd have to be the main NHL goaltender this year, right? So, I mean, Jake's 32 right now. His current contract has 1 year left. I think it's $2.8 million. That takes him to age 33. Let's say they give him a 2-year extension. That's just a guess on my part. That takes him to age 35. Probably don't really have to pay him big money. Probably something comparable to what he's earning now would be my best guesstimate on a new contract. And then they would have Primeau and Jake under contract, matching deals 3 years. And you would hope, and then the plan would be that Primeau could be kind of groomed and mentored, and by the end of that contract, be the starting goaltender. At least that would be the hope and the plan. They're at least running in more of a 1A, 1B, or that Primeau's the starter. I think that's probably your longer-term outlook by my best guess, based on what the strategies here they seem to be using for the future. Then, of course, what happens to Montembeault? Could they move Montembeault? It's likely it's going to happen at some point, would be my guess. It doesn't necessarily have to happen, as I mentioned, before the season starts. However, there are teams out there in the NHL that need goaltending help. There's a couple of obvious ones out there, and maybe they get a good offer that they decide to make the deal. That is quite possible. But I don't think the Habs really need to rush into this. As I mentioned, Primeau is waivers exempt. They can put him in Laval. His contract won't count against the cap, and he won't have to clear waivers, so there's no risk of losing him. And at this point, the other big question as well is not only who is your NHL tandem, but who's going to play at the American Hockey League level. I mean, Primeau was one of those main players in the crease last year. McNiven, who has been in the organization for some time, was moved. He's no longer a Habs prospect goaltender. There's nobody else on an NHL two-way contract right now. They may have, I'm sure they have other goalies in training camp for Laval, and that maybe there'll be somebody else who can get signed, but they probably want a little bit more experience down there. There's been some talk and speculation that young goalie Michael DiPietro in Vancouver, who wants a fresh start and wants a trade and has permission from the Canucks with his agent to seek that and talk to other teams, that there was interest from Montreal. And it makes sense because they're looking at this. They're certainly thin on the depth department with experience back there. So could they maybe start the NHL season with Allen and Montembeault in Montreal, and Primeau and maybe DiPietro in Laval if they make that acquisition? That to me would make a ton of sense. If it's not DiPietro, it needs to be somebody else who can be, a 3-4 kind of guy in an organization and get an opportunity to play. Now, of course, and at some point, you would think that a Montembeault trade, whether it be later in the season or something, to me would make sense, unless you get that just an offer that you can't refuse now. But I don't think that's part of the plan, but it could be. We'll just have to wait and see. But at some point, I think Montembeault is moved, and your longer-term plan by the end of this year or into next is that you'll have a Jake Allen, Cayden Primeau tandem for at least possibly have matching contracts. We'll see. And then we'll run with that for a couple more years beyond this one and see where things go from there as the team starts building back up again. So could we see a goalie trade? We could, but I'm not sure it's the trade that people are thinking. I think if anything, they'll bring in American Hockey League help and maybe move out Montembeault if an offer comes along that is just too good for them to pass up. If not, then we'll see maybe another goalie trade down the road. At least that's my take. We'll see what happens, but this Primeau contract doesn't necessarily mean a string of other moves, including a goalie trade going out, that is going to happen. I think a goalie trade coming in is more likely first, but we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on the contract, how the goalie situation will play out in Montreal this year. Down in the comments, we'll talk about it further. Of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.